over 2 million more appointments in our first year. We actually smashed that target with a 4.6 million delivered. Waiting lists are currently at their lowest level in 2 years. This month and last month, the waiting list figures show the first fall in waiting lists for those months in 17 years. So these are all signs of encouragement and improvement. There's light at the end of the tunnel. And of course, it's really important I add, that doesn't mean all the problems have gone away. And there'll still be plenty of people listening who are waiting on a waiting list, who are struggling to get access to a GP or a dentist, and for whom their experience of the NHS falls far short of what I would want or the NHS would want. And that's why the threat of strike action by resident doctors is so concerning, because it risks plunging the progress we're making into reverse. It's the last thing the NHS needs. It's the last thing the country needs. I also think it's the last thing that NHS staff need, because those achievements I mentioned, they're not simply the government's achievements. Yes, we've put in place the resources and the reform, but ultimately the care is being delivered by the staff themselves, and we couldn't do it without them. And so here we are with the threat of 5 days of strike action at the end of this month. And what I cannot understand, and I think other NHS staff, let alone the country, can't understand, is how, after having had a 28.9% pay increase from this government, resident doctors are now saying we're going out on strike. There isn't a precedent for this in the history of British trade unions.
Let's see what they think and what they want to ask you about it. Shivam has called from Fulham. Hello, Shivam.
Hello there. Hi, so Mr. Streeting, I have a question for you. You previously said that full pay restoration is a journey, but your current offer is only 0.9% above inflation. And that means that full pay restoration at this pace would take over 20 years. Do you think that's acceptable? If not, what's an acceptable time frame for you?
So, Shivam, in terms of the figure you just mentioned, the pay award that resident doctors have had for this year averages out at 5.4%. And that is the highest award in the entire public sector. Taken together with the deal we did with the BMA last year, that's a 28.9% pay increase.
Mr. Streeting, now, what is an acceptable time frame?
Let him answer your question. I will get back to you, Shivam.
I accept the argument that you and your colleagues in the BMA are making, that your pay has been eroded over more than a decade by the Conservatives. I mean, not literally your pay, because you wouldn't have been in the NHS all of that time, but the pay for your part of the profession has been eroded. And the same is also true for nurses, for consultants, for other NHS and social care staff, for the entire public sector. And that's why I'm proud that when we came in, not only did we do the deal with resident doctors, but the entire public sector has had real terms pay rises. All I ask you to consider is two things. One is that the public finances are under real pressure. So we're doing as much as we can, as fast as we can. And secondly, it's not just the pay that we have to contend with, it's also the conditions. You don't need me to tell you, because you're working in it, the sort of conditions that NHS staff are subjected to in terms of the bricks and mortar, the fabric, the building, the kit and the equipment. And that's not just true for our National Health Service. We'd be having the same conversation about our schools, about our prisons, about the entire public sector. So no, Shivam, I have not been able to overturn more than a decade of pay erosion in 1 year. But 28.9% is not only a good start, it is not the condition on which you and your colleagues should be walking out on strike. And I'll say something else to you. And my question back to you is, when you're out on strike at the end of this month, standing out on the picket line, protesting a 28.9% pay increase, what's your message to the patients whose operations and appointments and procedures will be delayed and cancelled? And also, what's your message to other NHS staff who will be inside picking up the pieces, having received a lower pay award than you, and in many cases working on lower pay? I don't think that's fair. I don't think these strikes are necessary, and I don't think the BMA's actions are reasonable.
And just before I hear from you, Shivam, and I will come back to you, worth saying that almost 350,000 nursing staff in England, Wales and Northern Ireland will be asked to vote from Monday on a 3.6% pay rise. Shivam, your response?
I know that Mr. Streeting did actually answer my question, but this huge percentage increase...
I think he did. I think he did.
This huge percentage increase that Mr. Streeting's talking about is just an extra £4 an hour. 3 years ago, doctors were paid £14 an hour, and now we're paid around £18 an hour. And what we're asking for is a reverse of the pay cuts. As Mr. Streeting said, a journey to pay restoration, and for a doctor to be paid £22.67 an hour to deliver life-saving treatment, to restart people's hearts, to look after hundreds of patients overnight. £22.67 an hour. In fact, if Mr. Streeting agrees today to pay doctors, currently doctors are getting paid less than their assistants. If he agrees to pay doctors £22.67 an hour a day, and £22.67 an hour, you can call off the strikes, and I'll tell you what, you don't even have to do it all in one go. What do you say? £22.67 an hour, Mr. Streeting.
Over what period, Shivam?
Well, that's up to Mr. Streeting. What does he... That's the whole point of my initial question. But obviously, 20 years is not acceptable. I mean, that's... Obviously, Mr. Streeting might not even be in power in 4 years.
Before Wes Streeting answers that, can I ask you something, and perhaps he'd like to reflect on it too, once he's answered your question. What about your pensions? Pensions are very generous. Under the NHS scheme, staff contribute between 5 and 12% of their salaries. The state contributes, comparatively to other places, and certainly the private sector, 23.7% to your pension every year.
Yes, and our pensions have also been degraded because the pensions are based on
Still
our
better
pay.
than most.
And
Still
our
better
pay
than
has
most,
been
Shivam.
significantly eroded. And you try and tell a doctor that your pension, which you're going to get in about 50 years, doctors are struggling now.
Well, it's growing now. That's the point. Way more than other people's.
Look, let's just start on the points of agreement. So look, I understand that last point, Shivam, which is talking about pensions when you retire doesn't pay the bills today. I totally understand that. I also accept the arguments that you and your colleagues have been making about pay erosion, and also the conditions you've been working in terms of things like your rotations, your placements, and the bottlenecks in career progression that mean it is now harder to progress on to the promise of becoming the consultants of the future, where if we can get you into promotion and onto consultant level, you're paid at that stage as a starting salary over £100,000 a year. So on that, I think we're all agreed. Now, in terms of where pay sits today, and this was before the 5.4% pay rise came in, a first-year resident doctor out of medical school would be paid £43,275 on average. That's more than the average worker in this country. For the second year out of medical school, it goes up just 1 year later to £52,300. In the core training years, it averages out at £67,000 a year, and specialty registrars are paid almost £75,000. And that doesn't take into account the employer pension contributions. Now, you are all highly skilled, qualified people, and we desperately need you in the NHS. So I don't discount all of those things for a moment. My reluctance to sit here and say, here's how we map out the journey to the pay restoration you're campaigning for, is I don't make promises I can't keep. And you will see the state of the public finances as they are today. And it would be, I think, really unfair for me to sit here and say, well, by the end of this parliament, we can get to X or Y, because I can't guarantee that the public finances would support it. And the second thing I would say is, in terms of the pay that's been awarded this year, it is the highest percentage pay increase across the public sector. We cannot afford to open that pay award. We just can't. And even if we could, it would be unfair on the people who had a lower percentage pay increase and who are paid less, who are at the forefront of my mind because they are struggling to pay their bills even more. So those are the constraints I'm operating under. That doesn't mean that you know, in terms of the health secretary you've got to work with, I mean, quite genuinely, you've got a health secretary that is sympathetic to the arguments you're making, has worked with your predecessors to increase pay significantly by 28.9% in the first year that I've been in, and who wants to work with you to address all those other issues, the rotations, the placements, the bottlenecks, all of those other things. Honestly, do you think that the alternative that stares me across the face in the House of Commons will be better? You've got the ghost of Christmas past and the Conservative Party that left you out in the cold and left you out on strike. And you've got the ghost of Christmas future in the form of Nigel Farage and Reform, who don't even believe in the NHS and don't agree that I should have given you the money last year. So work with the partner you've got in front of you and call off these strikes. We can make progress. Don't set it back.
Okay.
And the final thing I'd say is there are choices and trade-offs. If doctors are out on strike and we're cancelling operations and appointments and inflicting that misery on patients, we're also paying a heavy price financially, and we're going to have to find the money from somewhere, and that limits my opportunity
pensions?
to do
doctors' pensions?
Well, it limits my opportunities to deal with the other issues they're talking about in terms of doctor unemployment, in terms of their ability to progress to consultant posts.
Would you look at that hefty pension? That was generous pension, 23. If my employer was putting 23% into my pension, I'd be dancing down the street.
Well, I mean, we've got this situation, Sheila, where the pension pot, by the time people become consultants, is so big that consultants lobby us to change the tax rules because they're taxed so heavily on the pensions because they're that valuable that they're like, oh, I might as well not bother working, my pension's so valuable. That's where we get to then. Now, if the BMA want to come to me and say, do you know what, given that challenge, we think we would rather have a slightly less generous pension in order to have higher pay today.
You'll talk to
Those are the sorts of issues you can get into in a discussion. But I've offered to talk. They haven't taken me up, and that's one of many reasons I think it's unreasonable.
We've given a big chunk of time to that issue because it's so important. After the break, you'll hear from Mo, who has a question about her local hospice in Liverpool. And again, important things for us to know before we hear from Mo. Hospice UK, which represents more than 200 hospices, say many are having to make the tough decision to close. Last year, 1 in 5 hospices warned of service cuts, 300 beds taken out of commission, virtual hospices replacing real physical hospices that have done so much in the community. And I know, given the assisted dying and palliative care conversation that we've been having nationally, it's a really important issue. So Mo will bring that to us in just a moment. It's 2:16.
This is LBC. Fogarty on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Right, Mo has called from Liverpool with a question for Wes Streeting, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Labour MP for Ilford North, with us for another 20, 25 minutes, 20 probably. Hi, Mo.
Hi Sheila.
What's your question to Wes Streeting?
Well, it's a bit convoluted, but basically, Wes, thank you for letting me speak to you today.
No problem.
Marie Curie have now permanently closed our Liverpool Hospice after what was initially claimed to be a temporary closure due to staffing and inadequate funding. This is despite Marie Curie receiving almost £2 million of taxpayers' money from the ICB and significant amounts from fundraising and charitable donations. We're aware it's not just a local issue, as Sheila just alluded to, and other hospices have been closed or had cuts to services, including Hampstead in London. We feel that Marie Curie always has the same solution, which is close the hospice and replace the hospice care with a telephone call and these virtual wards. We've had quite a large public campaign and cross-party political support, including Maria Eagle, but we feel our city's been treated with disregard, lack of transparency, and poor insight, really, to the issues faced in a city with significant health inequalities. What really concerns us is the removal of choice and reliance on community and home care, which is not always appropriate or wanted, and gives a lack of option for terminally ill patients and their families at the most vulnerable. Especially with the assisted dying bill, which may force families into making heartbreaking decisions.
Now, if I can come in, Mo, we will obviously let Marie Curie respond in time to that. But Wes Streeting, on hospices, there are different ways to administer care. I mean, even just as I'm listening to Mo, I realise that the hospice she's talking about is the hospice where my father died.
Oh, goodness.
Last week of his life, beautiful care, good death. My mother had Marie Curie care, not for cancer, but in the house. Last 3 weeks of her life, beautiful care, good death. So there are different ways of doing this, but the physical experience of a hospice, being in a hospice, particularly with cancer, whose end often has to be so carefully managed, surely that's a vital service in most communities.
It really is, and I think Mo hit the nail on the head when she talks about the importance of families having that choice, and that different people want different things, and even going through an end-of-life experience, choices change. I mean, I saw the amazing difference that Marie Curie nurses made for my grandmother when she was dying of cancer a couple of years ago, and she had actually intended to go into her local hospice, but ended up choosing to stay at home and feeling comfortable and safe and cared for there, not least thanks to Marie Curie. But the support from her local hospice, which I'll give a shout out to, which is St Kent's in North Wales, it was amazing, and we really valued that as a family. And everyone deserves that kind of care.
Because we know that some people's end of life is in a hospital, in a corridor even. Or
in an accident emergency department, which is the worst place to die.
Exactly, yes. That's our group, our Hospice Action Group, we comprise of bereaved families mainly who have had the lived experience of trying to care for our loved ones at home. I'm actually a registered nurse. I had the extreme difficulty caring for my husband, whereas when the hospice inpatient bed was available, it made a huge difference.
Well, it allows you to be his wife again. It allowed me to be a daughter again. I'm sure you've experienced it yourself. Just respond
so in
to
terms
those
of
needs.
in terms of what we are doing so far, we put in place a grant of £100 million to support hospices, both to upgrade their buildings and also the kit and equipment they need to provide hospice at home care as well. And that's the biggest funding for hospices in a generation. We've also provided £26 million to support children and young people's hospices in particular, because, they are underfunded. Now, there is definitely more to do, and this is going to be a common theme, I'm sure, across our questions. So we're trying to do more as a government. I think the other thing I'd say to the public, not everyone's able to give, and I know there are lots of people out there who are really feeling the pinch in their own pockets at the moment. But it's also why, as well as state funding, which is still the minority of funding that hospices give, the donations that we all provide as members of the public also make a really big difference and can be the difference between services being open or closed, available. No, it really shouldn't, Sheila. And I've never, to be honest, I've never been comfortable with the idea that this sort of care is voluntary funded rather than state funded. And this is definitely one of those things where given the means, I would change that overnight. But I think people will understand why, given all the pressures we're up against. I wish I could promise it. I couldn't deliver it. But we can start moving in that direction. And in the meantime, I just urge people to give as generously as they can. And we'll try and do what we can to make sure that your donations go even further because of the state funding that we're putting in behind it.
And I know you can't give us an answer to this, right this minute in the studio, but there's a reason we get you in to talk directly to people, is that they really want an answer. So can you commit to say to Mo, you will look at why Marie Curie, with 2 million of Integrated Care Board funding, is closing that hospice.
Yeah, I'll certainly. We've got a great relationship with Marie Curie. I'll definitely talk to them and to Merseyside MPs as well, including my colleague
Just
Maria
see what's
Eagle.
happening there.
Yeah,
It's
just
a vital service.
Yeah, and I know you'll get a response from them. They're under real pressure as well. I know that, and I'm sure it's not a decision they'll have taken lightly, but we'll pick it up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mo, for your call. Janet is called from Stockport. Hi, Janet. What do you want to ask Wes Streeting about?
Hi. Well, my question's about the provision of dental care, and I'm talking about the kind of dentistry that preserves the integrity and the functionality of teeth, not any cosmetic procedures. I now use a private dentist because I couldn't access an NHS dentist where I live. So I suppose my basic question is, what have you done so far, and what are you continuing to do to ensure that basic NHS dental care is available to anyone that seeks it? And what's your target to provide this level of accessibility to all?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, in terms of what we've done so far, so we're rolling out the 700,000 urgent dentistry appointments that we promised in our manifesto. Those are being rolled out right across England as we speak to try and meet that emergency urgent need that otherwise sees people at best in an accident and emergency department, and at worst, as we've seen reported, literally pulling their own teeth out. I mean, these are Dickensian conditions. So that will start to kind of stop the rot and deal with the immediate crisis facing us. But we know we've got to go further. On the prevention side, we're rolling out supervised toothbrushing for 3 to 5 year olds in areas of highest level of deprivation and tooth decay, because children's teeth, rotting teeth, are the number one reason for hospital admission amongst 5 to 9 year olds, so we've got to change that too. But we're also working with the British Dental Association on contract reform, because until we solve that problem, we are not actually going to be able to meet the level of need that exists in our country and rebuild an NHS dentistry service for all that certainly I would be proud of. Now, the British Dental Association, if they were on and sat next to me, would be saying, yes, and we appreciate what you've done so far on the urgent appointments, but you've got to go faster. It's going too slowly. And I do take that criticism on the chin. We are determined to move faster. It does take time and money. The latter is in short supply, but I'm going as fast as I can on dentistry. It is one of many, many broken parts of our NHS, but one that I know people are counting on us to fix.
And just briefly, what about that exclusive report we had at LBC today about foreign dentists, overseas dentists here working in McDonald's, waiting and waiting and waiting in the queue for doing the exam that would allow them to practice here? I mean,
yeah, we're looking at that issue, and we want to make sure we maintain our high standards.
Of course.
And there isn't always a direct read across between dentistry education, other countries and ours, so you've got to make sure you maintain standards. But honestly, we've got to go much further on this, and we've got some good pioneers of reformed approaches as well to dentistry. Keir, Rachel and I were a brilliant health centre in East London only the other week, where they were getting all of these dental hygienists and therapists in and trainees doing a lot of dentistry at scale in a very poor part of East London, and we were really impressed by what we saw.
It's the day you launched the 10-year plan.
Yeah, we launched the 10-year plan, and so that neighbourhood health approach is part of our 10-year plan, and people should see more of it. But okay. I recognise, like, we've off to a decent start, but much more to do on this one.
Janet, I hope you're happy with that answer. Scott has called from Glasgow. Hi, Scott.
Hiya. Wes, you've spoken throughout most of the call with some sort of relation to the squeeze on resources in the NHS, the challenge of funding in the NHS and various other parts of that. I wonder how you square the circle between that, which you're aware of on a daily basis, I'm sure, and the fact that you're on record as saying that you're perfectly willing to open the door for private medical care to come in to help reduce waiting lists. How do you square the circle between massive NHS resource challenges and willing to allow money to go out of the door of the NHS to private companies who, let's be honest, are using the same doctors?
So, two things. Where there is spare capacity in the private sector, we're willing to buy access to it at a fair price and making sure we maintain the good quality we expect for all healthcare in order to cut waiting lists faster. And we're doing that partly for pragmatic reasons, which is I want to get waiting lists down, but also for the principled reason, which is under the Conservatives, a two-tier health system opened up in this country where those who could afford it were being seen faster privately, and those who couldn't were being left behind. And that strikes at the heart of the revolutionary idea that came into effect 77 years ago, that healthcare should be available to all on the basis of need and not the ability to pay. And I'm defending that principle. Now, where I want to be and where we're heading is where the last Labour government got us to, which is making the NHS so good that not only does the NHS not have to pay for people to go private, use of the private sector under the last Labour government fell off a cliff because the NHS was so good people didn't feel the need to use the alternative.
The problem there was the money was comparatively awash with money. Tony Blair was able to commit an average of 6.8% spending increase. You've been able to commit around 3%.
Yeah, and what we've got in our favour is the revolution that's taking place in medicine, life sciences and technology, which means that we can make a whole load of changes to how care is delivered, where it's delivered, when it's delivered, that will enable us to get much more value out of every pound that we put into the NHS. And that's what's going to make it sustainable for the long term. It's the investment, sure, that's coming, but also the reform of how the system works, and also a big focus on public health and preventing ill health in the first place. That's how we make sure that NHS that we've loved for nearly a century now, a public service, publicly funded, free at the point of use, not only survives but thrives in the 21st century, because the principle I'm determined to defend is that when you fall ill, you never have to worry about the bill. And the NHS as a public service, publicly owned, publicly funded, will always be there for you when you need it.
On public health more generally, to keep us fit and mean we need the NHS less, a lot of that costs money, whether it's swimming pools, running tracks, great sports facilities, whatever it is. Tell me a bit about government thinking on the use of weight loss jabs, because the criteria for being prescribed it on the NHS has widened a little. So it's more accessible on the NHS than it was. That's the idea. But we know from GP surgeries, some GP surgeries, they can't afford to be dishing it out. So...
Yeah, so we are dealing with that challenge because, and let's look at this in context. So, where I think these weight loss jabs have real potential is to help people with serious obesity who have tried all sorts of other things but have found the battle on exercise and nutrition insurmountable, to seriously reduce their weight and in a way that helps managing their diet and nutrition and getting out and doing exercise much easier. And this is one of the myths about weight loss jabs. They're not, you can't have the jab and then have loads of guilt-free McDonald's or down loads of pints and not feel the consequences. You can have the jabs, and alongside the diet and exercise, you will see a massive change, both in terms of your weight, but also your health, your well-being. And that there are really encouraging signs around that. And that's where I think they've got a role to play. Where I would advise caution for everyone is, as with all sorts of medication, you shouldn't take this medication without consulting the doctor, without following the proper advice. I do also worry, in a world of Instagram and everyone wanting the sort of, Insta body beautiful image, and in a world where eating disorders and positive body image remain real challenges, what I don't want is people thinking, we'll just jab our way to being unhealthily thin either. So we've got to look at this as a nuanced debate. But I think there are lots of people in this country who are dying early and who are suffering while they're alive because of the obesity that they're carrying, and that's where these jabs can be transformational.
I'll get to Ruth's call in just one second, but you've spoken in the past about joined-up government, departments working together. The Department for Education needs to work with the Department of Health about kids and exercise and access to PE, because it's been shrinking and shrinking and shrinking in many areas, and it really can't.
So we co-fund across my department, the Department for Education and the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, a whole load of school sport activity, including getting more qualified trainers into the school to make sure we're getting kids really active at school, and not just in terms of sport, but also things like performing arts. Good, so it's good for healthy mind, body and soul. And then with Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, we're also looking at how we open up more opportunities for activity, culture in every part of the country, not just the big towns and cities. Okay. So we are joined up on this, and that's one of the exciting things about the 10-year plan. We're pulling together as a government team to make sure wherever you live, whatever your background, there are great things to do and enjoy which are good for mind, body and soul. Can I lead the More Swimming Pools campaign when that starts for you? Yeah, well, This is a sore subject for me. My local swimming pool's currently got rack and is closed. I'm currently trying to get Fulwell Cross Medical Centre back open. So this is a cross we all bear because, again, if we make it accessible and if we make it free or affordable, people do use it. Absolutely. Ruth has called from Nottingham. Hello, Ruth.
Hello. What I'd like to talk about is language that's used. When sex is relevant to health, the language that is used around it matters hugely. Yep. And we see in messaging for men, it's very clear. When it comes to women, absolutely not. So will you commit to ensuring that all health messaging that comes from the NHS or that has government funding uses clear sex-based language? Yes, this is really important. And I think we have seen too many examples where, with good intentions, particularly in the context of biological sex, trying to be more trans-inclusive, certain terms have been changed, but in a way that erases women's identities and women's biology, and also in a way that sometimes even the same document doesn't do the same to men, which just adds insult to injury. And I just think there's this really powerful word in the English language called "and." So, for example, if you're inviting someone to a cervical smear test... Women and trans men. Exactly. And it's really important to speak in plain English because, with the best will in the world, there'll be lots of women out there with a cervix who wouldn't necessarily, if they're walking past a poster or there's a leaflet trying to catch your eye and you're busy, if something says, "Hello, people with cervixes," you're not going to give it a second look. If you're looking at something that says, "Women," very clearly, this information's for you, or, women and trans men, have a look at this. That's more likely to stop and grab your attention, but we've got to speak in plain English. And I genuinely think, and I've tried to bang this drum a lot on these issues, there is a way through all of this which is inclusive and respectful to everyone, and crucially doesn't erase the voices, the rights and the identities that women have fought for generations. It all got a bit silly, didn't it, Ruth? Oh, and it's still absolutely ridiculous. In some ways, yeah. Something I would like to add is additive language is all very well, but it confuses. It makes things harder for those with a lower level of literacy to understand. It would be better to have things completely and utterly simple and sex-based, and then target those who have a different identity separately, because they're not going to engage in something in a similar way. So I think that's more simple and clear. Okay. Is but that's your point, Ruth. But I think as a society we are moving on. And I think we understand what a trans woman is. We understand what a trans man is. I think. And I think one of the opportunities that comes with some of the things that are in our 10-year plan for health, particularly on the way the NHS communicates, the use of the NHS app, we can provide a much more personalised service. So if you need to be invited for screening, if there's a certain service that's available to you because of your background, your sex, or anything else, we can ping you directly and say, "Wes, it's time for you to come in for your kidney cancer check," or "Janice, it's time for you to come in for breast cancer screening." And GP surgeries already do. I've had that from my GP surgery telling me to respond when I get my it's great. My GP surgery recently texted me saying, "Make sure you've got the NHS app downloaded. We're booking appointments through it now," which was music to my ears as a patient and as a health secretary. Ruth, thank you very much for your call. Let's hear from Bullady in Denham. Hello, Bullady. Bullady, can you hear us?
Hi, Wes. Just a quick one about. Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Yeah, we can hear you fine. Loud and clear. Fire away. Hi. I was just giving you a quick call because I've just been recently diagnosed. I've been recently diagnosed with ADHD, and I had to pay for that privately, out of pocket £1,000. I was fortunate enough to be able to afford that. But since then, I've had a lot of people approach me, both adults and parents who've got children who they suspect have got ADHD, but the wait at the moment is something 2 years plus. and they just despair as to what they're able to do. It's disruptive in terms of their emotions. It's disruptive in terms of school. It's for me, it's a time bomb waiting to happen, really.
Well, and work life as well.
Really,
Buludi makes a point about how it disrupts people's lives, and given that the mantra from the government at the moment,
absolutely.
I mean, people deserve the care first and foremost, but the mantra from the government is those who can work should work. A lot of people are made incapable of working because they're waiting for this diagnosis.
Yeah, and the great thing about that question is it reminds us this isn't just something that affects children and their lives, but also affects adults. Now, I'm particularly concerned about children because conditions like ADHD and autism, if undiagnosed and unrecognised, will mean that children don't receive the adjustments and the focus and attention that they deserve to help them achieve every ounce of their potential. Because there are differences in how they behave, how they see the world, and how they receive information, which, if understood by educators, can easily be accommodated. But if they're not understood, can manifest itself in poor attainment
and
sometimes poorer behaviour. And then, some poor kid is getting blamed and they don't understand why. And so we've got to get this right. We've got to cut waiting lists. I'm working with the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. We've got a whole reform agenda in the pipeline around special educational needs and disabilities.
Can I ask you a blunt question on that?
Yep.
Are you satisfied as Health Secretary that whatever happens in those SEN reforms, children's rights won't be removed?
Yeah, it's got to get better, not worse. That's the aim of what we're aiming at.
Even if you remove the HCPs, and I'm not saying you're going to do that, but the fact parents fear that you might.
I must say, as someone who, this is obviously being led by Bridget, but it has such a strong health dimension that I'm absolutely working with and supporting her on this. I do think, I was looking at some of the debate earlier this week, I do think a lot of people have jumped the gun and there is a lot of unnecessary worry out there as a result.
But can you say children's rights won't be watered down?
We want to protect children's rights. We want to make sure we get...
You want to or you will?
No, we will protect... Obviously, we protect children's rights, but also want to make sure that we realise all of their potential. And we're trying to get this right. It is currently unsustainable. And I look at my casework for children with special educational needs and disabled children, and it is so far from the speed and the quality that they deserve. That's what Bridget and I and the government are trying to address. And I think we've seen all sorts of speculation about what might or might not be proposed by government that hasn't even finished considering what we're going to do yet. So I think everyone just needs to sort of take a little bit of step back, engage with the Department for Education that's leading on this and make sure we get this right. We want to get this right.
Wes Streeting, thank you. Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Labour MP for Ilford North. It's 2:41.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
The Anglo-French migration deal is hanging in the balance, haggling over how much Britain will pay towards the cost of policing small boat crossings. Defence Secretary John Healey joins me now. One of the possibilities, we read, is a deal where 50 migrants are sent back to France each week. Is that something the government would support?
Well, let's see what the summit discussions produce.
Well, is that something you would support? Is that radical enough for you?
We've got to have an element of the action we take has got to be the ability to return people.
Nick Ferrari breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio on Global Player.